Lami sat quietly at the farthest corner of the compound, her back pressed against the cool clay wall, watching the dusk creep across the sky. She did not speak much, not because she had nothing to say, but because the space to be heard had never been given. From the day she was married into the Alawa family, her voice had become as weightless as the dust they made her sweep each morning. Her eyes, deep and thoughtful, held stories she had not yet learned how to tell. The marriage had not been her choice. It had been arranged swiftly, with little consultation, as though she were an item exchanged in a market deal. Her father, worn from debt and illness, had handed her over to the Alawa household with tired eyes and trembling hands, whispering that this was her chance at stability. But stability was a lie wrapped in tradition. Her husband, Bamadiel, barely looked at her. When he did, it was often with disappointment or cold disinterest. Their wedding night was marked by silence and averted eyes, and from then on, Bamadiel treated her presence like that of a ghost, unwelcome but tolerated. His mother, Aya Bamadiel, made no secret of her disdain. A tall woman with sharp cheekbones and sharper words, she often accused Lami of laziness, of bringing bad luck into the home. The moment months passed and Lami's belly remained flat, the cruelty deepened. In Yoruba culture, a bride's worth was often measured by how quickly she could open her womb. Lami, it seemed, had failed that test. She was given foul herbs to drink and subjected to humiliating ceremonies under the guise of fertility blessings. Old women came and rubbed her stomach, whispering incantations as if coaxing hidden seeds to sprout. Nothing changed and the blame always circled back to her. One morning, after another shouting match in the courtyard, this time because she had not ground pepper fine enough, Lami escaped into the bush path that led to the river Ori. It was forbidden to go alone, especially as a woman, but the river was the only place that listened. The river Ori was more than water. It was said to be the home of an old goddess, a spirit older than memory. Elders said she whispered secrets to those who came with clean hearts. Others said she swallowed the unworthy whole. To Lami the river was a balm. She sat at its edge, dipping her toes into the current, whispering her pain into the ripples. She brought offerings, small beads, broken combs, even a piece of her wedding veil, and laid them on the mossy rocks. The river never took them but never pushed them away. Lami began to go every week. Sometimes twice. Each time she left a little lighter, her breath easier. One evening she wept openly, the tears falling into the river like small prayers. "I just want peace," she murmured. "If not joy, then silence. If not love, then safety." But back at the compound nothing changed. Bamadiel began to return later and later, the smell of palm wine clinging to his clothes. He stopped speaking to her entirely. The house seemed to conspire to make her invisible. Her food was eaten last, if at all. Her name was never spoken unless followed by blame. Still she endured. Each insult, each shove of the shoulder or whispered mockery she carried silently. But silence, like the river, had a depth. One evening, as the harmattan winds began to dry the air, a visiting elder accused Lami of being a spirit bride, one who marries only in body but belongs in soul to the river. "That's why her womb is sealed," he declared. "She's already given to something else." The household seized on the idea. If she were a spirit bride, she was a danger. They whispered about what misfortune she might bring, about how long they had tempted the gods by keeping her under their roof. That night, Lami awoke to the sound of footsteps and cloth rustling. She was dragged from her mat by Bamadiel and two of his uncles. They did not let her scream. They tied her wrists and gagged her mouth. Aya Bamadiel stood at the gate, holding a calabash filled with ash and bitter cola. "The river gave her to us," she said coldly. "Let the river take her back." They took her to the river Ori under the cover of darkness. The moon was high and distant, a pale witness to the crime unfolding below. They spoke no words as they dragged her to the edge, only muttered prayers to cleanse themselves. Then, without a moment's pause, they shoved her into the river's belly. The water was shockingly cold. It embraced her like arms too strong to escape. Lami fought for air, but her bindings pulled her down. Her scream never broke the surface. Above, the ripples stilled. They waited for a few moments, then turned and left, wiping their hands as if the act had cleansed them. "She has gone back to her people," one of them whispered. "But the river does not forget." Down in its depths, something stirred. Something old. Something listening. Lami's body drifted into a current that did not belong to this world. She felt warmth return, not heat but presence. Hands that mended what had been broken. Voices that sang not in fear but in recognition. When she opened her eyes, she lay on the shore, naked but unbound. The river was silent. Her body, though bruised, no longer ached. She stood slowly, her hands moving instinctively to her belly. There, under the crescent of her ribs, a gentle warmth pulsed. A hum. A second heartbeat. Lami was alive. And no longer alone. Lami returned to the river Ori, her feet bare, body cloaked in a simple wrapper that clung to her damp skin. She walked with a quiet, deliberate strength, like someone reborn but unsure of the world they had returned to. Her thoughts were heavy, tangled in memory, of the hands that had pushed her, of the cold water, of the breath she'd lost, and yet something inside her pulsed with warmth. A heartbeat that was not hers alone. She knelt at the riverbank. The waters were calm, but they shimmered in an odd, almost sentient way, like something beneath the surface watched her. A breeze curled through the reeds, gentle but persistent, brushing against her ear in what felt like a whisper. She stilled. The wind came again, this time with a sharper edge. The voice it carried was faint, not quite words but not without meaning either. It was like the hum of memory, the rustle of grief in a silent room. Lami blinked and looked around. No one. She turned her face back to the water. Her reflection stared back, eyes a little older, skin a little firmer, and something in her gaze that hadn't been there before. Strength perhaps. Or something older. The river began to ripple again. This time she didn't flinch. The whisper was clearer now. It came not from the wind, but from the water itself, soft, layered voices rising from the depths, just beyond understanding. They did not speak in any human tongue, but Lami understood. She understood the feeling. We see you. We hear you. You were never alone. The river remembered. Every prayer she had poured into its waves, every tear shed into its banks, it had listened. And now it whispered back. She stood abruptly, overwhelmed. Was she imagining it? Had death opened her mind to things it shouldn't? Or was this the spirit the villagers spoke of, the old goddess of Ori, ancient and awakened? Later that day she walked slowly through the village, and though she bore no bruises, people stared. Children stopped playing and went silent when she passed. Women stepped aside, whispering behind their wrappers. Men lowered their heads, muttering greetings they had never offered before. It was as if the river had marked her. She reached the marketplace where an old woman with braided silver hair sold bundles of dried herbs and charms from a mat on the ground. Her name was Adaiswa, one of the oldest in the village, known for both wisdom and warning. Lami had never spoken to her before, but something drew her close. You returned? Adaiswa said before Lami could even greet her. Her voice was gravelly like the cracking of dried wood. Lami nodded. Yes, Mama. Adaiswa's eyes flicked down to Lami's belly, then back to her face. The river doesn't let go easily, she murmured, almost to herself. I didn't ask to come back, Lami said softly. But I think it chose me. Adaiswa's hand trembled as she reached for a calabash gourd filled with cowrie shells. She shook it gently, then placed it beside her. The river Ori is sacred, she said, her eyes now sharp. It was once the mouth of justice. A place where the spirits drank pain and returned vengeance in waves. Many have begged it for children, for rain, for mercy. But few have cried into it the way you did. Lami's heart quickened. What do you mean? The river remembers sorrow, Adaiswa said. It is ancient and it listens when no one else does. Your tears were not just tears. They were offerings. And now it whispers. Lami hesitated. I heard it speak. The old woman's face went still. You must be careful. If the river knows your grief, it may offer you power, but power is never free. And if it mourns with you, it may mourn through you. Do not cry into that water again, child. Let it grieve only once. Lami swallowed hard. She felt the weight of the unborn heartbeat within her, steady and warm. What happens if I do? Adaiswa picked up her shells but did not shake them again. Then the river will rise. And everything it remembers, it will release. The rain came down hard that night, as if the sky itself wanted to hide the sins of man beneath its weeping. Thunder growled low and angry over the hills, and the trees swayed like ancient witnesses bracing for a coming wrong. Lami had felt it in her bones all day, an unsettling in the air, something crawling beneath her skin. Her husband, Tunji, had not spoken to her since dawn. Her mother-in-law, Kafila, paced the house like a lioness cornered. Even the servants whispered more than usual, their glances lingering on Lami with unreadable intent. The entire compound had turned cold. The morning had begun with yet another ritual. A woman from the next village, a self-proclaimed midwife and fertility priestess, had arrived. She brought clay bowls, bitter roots, and chalk symbols she scrawled across the floor of Lami's room. Lami was made to drink a foul concoction, then stripped and paraded before a cold hearth while the others chanted. Kefila knelt beside the priestess, whispering prayers that sounded more like curses. When the ritual ended in silence, when no divine spark had announced a child within her, their faces fell into disappointment. Disappointment turned into anger. Lami was not just barren now. She was cursed. She has blocked the path, Kefila hissed behind her. A womb like stone. She must be cleansed. Tunji didn't speak. He just nodded once, eyes lowered, mouth clenched tight. Lami felt it then, something was about to happen. But she had no voice left to protest. She had cried every tear she had into the river Ori. Her protest had turned into whispers, then silence. She moved through her days like smoke through rafters, seen, breathed in, and forgotten. By dusk, the decision had been made. They came to her room just before midnight. Kefila, Tunji, and 2 other men from the extended family. They told her she would be cleansed. The midwife's rituals hadn't worked, they said, but the river Ori had never failed. All she needed was full submersion, purification by sacred water. Her womb, her spirit, her path to motherhood would be restored. She had faith. Lami knew. She knew it in the way one knows they won't come back from a journey, even before the first step. The walk to the river was quiet. No lanterns were lit. The men carried torches but kept them low, shadows licking their feet. The rain had slowed to a heavy mist, but the thunder still rolled, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth and old secrets. They reached the riverbank and Lami looked out at the water. It was darker than she had ever seen it, yet it shimmered faintly beneath the moonlight. It looked still, but there was something beneath it, she could feel it. Watching. Waiting. "Remove your wrapper," Kefila said, her voice stern but trembling. Lami did not move. Tunji stepped forward and took her hand, not gently, not with affection. He pulled her roughly toward the edge. "It's for your own good," he muttered. "The river will cleanse what is wrong in you." "What is wrong in me?" she asked, voice barely audible. "Or in you?" No one answered. The 2 men grabbed her arms. Her feet sank into the muddy bank. The river lapped at her toes, cold and thick. She looked up at the sky. No stars tonight. Kefila began to speak, words meant for a prayer, but they stung with something darker. "River Ori, mother of tides, mother of judgment, take this vessel. Cleanse her womb. Remove the shadow she has brought to our home. Accept this offering." The words trailed off as Lami was pushed forward. The water swallowed her with shocking speed. It was colder than anything she had felt in her life. Her lungs clamped shut, panic surged. She kicked, gasped, but a heavy weight pressed down from above. A hand. Then another. They were holding her down. She opened her eyes underwater and saw the ripples of their faces above. Kefila. Tunji. And then, just the blackness of water. No light. No faces. No air. Her body began to thrash. She reached for the surface, but it moved farther away. Her ears filled with rushing sound, louder than thunder. Then stillness. But it was not death. She felt a presence, something vast, surrounding her on every side. The river wasn't just water. It was alive. It was awake. She didn't breathe, but she didn't need to. A voice, ancient and female, echoed through her bones. "You cried into me. I drank your sorrow. Now I shall carry your justice." Something touched her belly, warm and pulsing. And then, darkness. On the surface, the family stood in silence, rain misting their faces. Kefila nodded, signaling the men to say the final words. "No one must know," she said. "The river took her. She was unclean. It is done." They walked away. But as they left, the water behind them bubbled once, then twice. A small wave rose, then collapsed back into itself. The river Ori never forgets. 3 days later, a woman appeared at the edge of the village. Soaked in river water, her skin glowing faintly under the midday sun. Her steps were slow, but each one struck the earth with certainty. It was Lami. And her belly was round. The river Ori, once a place of comfort and quiet ritual, now stretched unnaturally still across the village's edge. It neither flowed nor sang. Its waters, usually teeming with life, tiny fish darting through reeds, frogs croaking beneath moonlight, had fallen into a graveyard silence. No ripples broke the surface. No bird perched near its bank. The river had become like glass, smooth, cold, reflective of a stillness that was not peace but warning. The morning after Lami's disappearance, no one spoke of it openly. In-laws claimed she had run away in shame after the failed ritual. Tunji told the neighbors that she had left without saying goodbye. That she had finally done what she always wanted, to return to her childhood village. But the villagers knew. They had seen the group walk into the night and only 4 return. The silence of guilt hung heavier than the rain clouds. No one confronted Tunji or his mother outright, but eyes shifted in doorways when they passed, and conversation stopped mid-sentence. The river more than anything whispered the truth. Children no longer played by its edge. The women who came to wash clothes carried their basins elsewhere. Fishermen turned their nets to other streams. The river Ori was sacred, yes, but now it was also quiet in a way that screamed. On the third day, the chief elder of the village visited the river and stood at its edge for an hour. He spoke no prayers, offered no kola nuts, only stared into the motionless water. When he returned, he told no one what he saw. But his wife claimed he had woken several times that night, shaking and muttering Lami's name. Tunji, meanwhile, had begun to unravel. At first he dismissed it. He told himself it had been necessary, that the cleansing had simply gone too far. That he had done what a man must do when the spirits of his home were restless. But his reasoning dissolved like fog whenever he closed his eyes. He began to dream of water. At first it was just the sound, dripping, steady, echoing inside his skull. Then the images came. Lami's eyes, wide and unblinking beneath the surface. Her fingers brushing against his ankle. The river parting like a mouth. He woke each night in sweat, clutching his chest, convinced he'd inhaled water in his sleep. By the fifth night he no longer bathed. The house grew sour with the scent of unrest. Kafila tried burning herbs to clear it, muttering that it was only guilt, that they had done what they had to do. But she too was changing. Her once sharp posture had hunched. Her hands trembled when she reached for things. At times, she looked out the window and flinched as if something had moved just beyond her view. One night, a servant girl claimed she saw Lami in the courtyard, walking barefoot, her wet wrapper clinging to her body, her belly round and glowing like a full moon. No one believed her, until they checked the courtyard. The ground was soaked. Water pooled where no rain had fallen. After that, silence wasn't just in the river. It grew in the village like mold. People spoke less. Doors stayed shut. The birds no longer sang at dawn. The elders met in hushed council, debating whether they should approach the shrine by the river to ask the spirits for clarity. But the river shrine had grown wild. Creepers covered the carved stone. The priest who once tended it had fallen ill days after Lami's disappearance. Fevered and raving, he claimed the river spoke in his dreams, calling out a name over and over. That name was not Lami. It was Mother. And still the river waited. Unmoving. Unsmiling. It was the silence before a storm, the pause before a drumbeat. Everyone in the village could feel it. Something had been taken into the water. And something was coming back. It happened on the night of the full moon, exactly one moon cycle since the river had swallowed its secret. The villagers had grown used to its silence, but that night, something shifted. The sky was cloudless, the stars sharp and trembling like they too awaited something. The moon hung low and swollen, casting an eerie silver glow over the village and the glass-like surface of the river Ori. Then the river began to rise. Not with rain. Not with storm. But with purpose. Its waters swelled silently, spilling over its banks in slow, deliberate waves. The reeds bent back in reverence. Frogs croaked once and fell silent. Even the crickets held their breath. The current rippled upward, not outward, as if something was pushing from beneath. At dawn, the villagers gathered, drawn by instinct and dread to the edge of the river. And there she stood, Lami. She emerged not dripping but dewed, her skin shimmering as if kissed by starlight. Her wrapper clung to her, yet no chill touched her. Her feet left no wet prints on the soil. Her hair floated slightly, though no wind stirred. And though the villagers blinked and rubbed their eyes, none could deny what they saw. She was pregnant. Visibly. Fully. A swell of life cradled within her, pulsing gently beneath her glowing skin. But more than that, it was her eyes that stopped every whisper, every breath. They were not simply the eyes of a woman returned. They were the eyes of someone who had seen beyond the veil. They held the color of river depths, the silence of stone, and the memory of every drop ever spilled in sorrow or song. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The villagers dropped to their knees, some in prayer, some in fear. Behind her, the river stilled again, but now it shimmered, alive once more. Birds returned to the trees. A breeze rustled the palms. And the air smelled faintly of rain and something ancient, like the first moment the world was born. Kafila, watching from behind a window shutter, let out a gasp so sharp it cut her throat. Her knees buckled, and for the first time since that night, her tongue froze. Tunji had been away, trying to flee to another village under the guise of trade, but Kafila knew there would be no escaping now. Lami walked forward slowly, not toward her old home, but toward the sacred shrine that had long been abandoned. As she passed, the villagers parted without thinking, stepping aside as if the river itself flowed through her body. A child called out, "Is she alive?" And the elder who had watched the river the day after her disappearance replied softly, "No. She is something more." Lami stopped before the shrine, knelt, and placed her hand on the earth. The shrine lit with a pulse, soft, warm breathing. The river Ori had returned her not as she was, but as it willed. And in her silence all understood. The river had not drowned her. It had chosen her. It happened on the night of the full moon, exactly one moon cycle since the river had swallowed its secret. The villagers had grown used to its silence, but that night something shifted. The sky was cloudless, the stars sharp and trembling like they too awaited something. The moon hung low and swollen, casting an eerie silver glow over the village and the glass-like surface of the river Ori. Then the river began to rise. Not with rain. Not with storm. But with purpose. Its waters swelled silently, spilling over its banks in slow, deliberate waves. The reeds bent back in reverence. Frogs croaked once and fell silent. Even the crickets held their breath. The current rippled upward, not outward, as if something was pushing from beneath. At dawn, the villagers gathered, drawn by instinct and dread to the edge of the river. And there she stood, Lami. She emerged not dripping but dewed, her skin shimmering as if kissed by starlight. Her wrapper clung to her, yet no chill touched her. Her feet left no wet prints on the soil. Her hair floated slightly, though no wind stirred. And though the villagers blinked and rubbed their eyes, none could deny what they saw. She was pregnant. Visibly. Fully. A swell of life cradled within her, pulsing gently beneath her glowing skin. But more than that, it was her eyes that stopped every whisper, every breath. They were not simply the eyes of a woman returned. They were the eyes of someone who had seen beyond the veil. They held the color of river depths, the silence of stone, and the memory of every drop ever spilled in sorrow or song. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The villagers dropped to their knees, some in prayer, some in fear. Behind her, the river stilled again, but now it shimmered, alive once more. Birds returned to the trees. A breeze rustled the palms. And the air smelled faintly of rain and something ancient, like the first moment the world was born. Kafila, watching from behind a window shutter, let out a gasp so sharp it cut her throat. Her knees buckled, and for the first time since that night, her tongue froze. Tunji had been away, trying to flee to another village under the guise of trade, but Kafila knew there would be no escaping now. Lami walked forward slowly, not toward her old home, but toward the sacred shrine that had long been abandoned. As she passed, the villagers parted without thinking, stepping aside as if the river itself flowed through her body. A child called out, "Is she alive?" And the elder who had watched the river the day after her disappearance replied softly, "No. She is something more." Lami stopped before the shrine, knelt, and placed her hand on the earth. The shrine lit with a pulse, soft, warm breathing. The river Ori had returned her not as she was, but as it willed. And in her silence all understood. The river had not drowned her. It had chosen her. Fear moves faster than truth. By midday the story had passed through every hut and corner of the village. Lami had returned. Pregnant. Alive. Or not quite alive. No one agreed. But all agreed on one thing: they were afraid. Children peeked from doorways. Old women spat behind their teeth when her name was mentioned. The blacksmith refused to stoke his fire, claiming the iron hissed like snakes when she passed. The butchers at the market whispered that their knives had dulled overnight. And the goats refused to graze where Lami's footprints still marked the earth. Some said she was no longer a woman but a Mami Wada, a river spirit returned to torment those who wronged her. Others claimed she was a vessel carrying something divine or monstrous. A few, braver or more foolish, muttered that she was a warning from the gods for sins buried too long beneath village pride. Lami, meanwhile, did not speak much. She wandered quietly through the village, barefoot, as if listening to something beneath the soil. Her eyes met no one's for long. When she passed the well, the water always trembled. When she walked by the old silk cotton tree, the birds scattered with a screech. Her husband, Tunji, who had just returned from his cowardly flight, stood before the council and said, "That is not my wife. My wife died. This is a demon in her skin." The elders listened, frowning, uncertain. His words were bitter, but the fear in his eyes was real. And yet, the belly swelling beneath Lami's wrapper looked far too real to deny. No ghost carried life like that. No spirit cast a shadow that touched the earth so softly. Still whispers grew. She drowned. she was offered. She came back carrying something that does not belong in this world. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. The yam fields around her in-laws' home turned yellow overnight. The cassava shriveled. The hens laid cracked eggs. A foul smell hung in the air near the compound's back gate, where it was later said she had been dragged toward the river. And yet, at the same time, wounded children began to heal. A boy whose leg had been bitten by a wild dog cried near her as she walked by. By nightfall, his mother swore the wound was closing, pink and clean. A girl who had not spoken in 2 years whispered Lami's name and then called for her mother. When Lami touched a dying tree outside the shrine, it bloomed the next morning. Balance and terror danced together. The villagers did not know whether to offer her gifts or build a fence around her. Some began to place small bowls of palm oil and white cloth outside her path just in case. One evening, a group of elders gathered at the foot of the sacred drum to read omens. They cracked kola nuts and watched how the pieces fell. They poured libations and read the lines in the spilled palm wine. The signs were strange, neither good nor evil but twisted and tangled. "She carries justice," one elder finally whispered, his voice shaking. "But justice for whom?" another asked. There was no answer. Meanwhile, Tunji locked his door every night. He woke screaming, soaked in sweat, claiming he saw river reeds sprouting from his floorboards. Kafila, his mother, no longer left her room. The village women said she kept trying to wash herself clean in salt water, scrubbing her skin raw. But Lami only walked. She never asked for vengeance. She never cried. She never looked at them with hate. And that silence unsettled them more than any scream could. Even the chief, a proud man who had dismissed the river's will as legend, began lighting candles at dusk and offering prayers beneath his breath. A group of women approached Lami one day. One of them, a widow named Yemisi, reached out trembling hands and said, "Are you still ours?" Lami smiled faintly, her eyes soft but unreadable. She touched Yemisi's hand, and the woman fell to her knees, weeping, not from fear but relief. "She is pain turned to protection," Yemisi later said. "But we're the ones who decide which she becomes." And so the village stood on the edge of fear and faith. Each sunrise felt heavier than the last. And deep in the night, when the frogs croaked and the wind carried strange ripples through the river reeds, one thought echoed in every heart. Lami had returned. But she had not come alone. Lami's belly swelled like the moon waxing toward fullness, round and undeniable. Each day it grew, not with heaviness but with strange lightness, as though she were carrying not just a child but a message. As her womb expanded, so too did the odd energy that danced around her. Trees leaned toward her. The wind paused when it passed. Even silence bent itself in her presence. She began to dream more vividly. In sleep, she floated once again in the cool waters of River Ori, neither alive nor dead, her skin pale with surrender. The river whispered to her, not in words she could easily grasp, but in riddles shaped like currents and truths hidden in flow. "The child is not yours alone," the river said one night, swirling around her feet. "You drowned with pain. You rose with purpose." Lami woke gasping, hand clutching her stomach. The baby kicked once, soft but deliberate. A ripple moved through her, and she swore she heard the sound of the river inside her body, like it still flowed in her veins. The villagers continued watching her, unsure whether to bow or flee. But the animals had made their choice. A white egret followed her from the trees, never flying too far. Wild dogs that once chased chickens now curled at her feet. A goat, known to bite children, gently licked her fingers when she passed. Even the old shrine cat, who had trusted no one in years, began sleeping at the foot of her mat. And then there were the dreams that weren't hers. She saw flashes in the night, hands wrapped in green river weed, pressing gently against her belly, voices chanting, not in Yoruba or any known tongue, but in something that vibrated through her bones. In one dream she saw her child, already walking, eyes glowing like dusk on water, touching a cracked wall and making it bloom with blue flowers. When she told the village healer, Mama Nyeri, the old woman listened without interruption. "Child of blood and spirit," the healer murmured. "You died and crossed the threshold. This one you carry did not come from your husband. It came from the place between the breath and the last sigh." Lami stared down at her stomach. Then, whose child is this? But Mama Nyeri only handed her a charm woven with fishbone and coral. "Feed it love. Feed it peace. The world will name it soon enough." Despite the unease in the village, the land around Lami began to bloom. The plants that once withered at her steps now twisted upward, green and lush. Fruit trees bore unseasonal gifts. Where she walked, puddles formed, even on dry days, leaving damp footprints that glistened in moonlight. She began remembering pieces of what the river told her when she had floated between death and return. Not all of it made sense yet, but some truths stood clear. She had not been drowned to cleanse her. She had been offered to the river in cruelty, but the river had taken her in with grace. And while the world above gasped and moved on, the world beneath, fluid, sacred, eternal, had whispered to her with a mother's voice. You were born of woman. You died of man. You rise with water. Your child will walk both paths. These memories filled her waking thoughts. She often stood at the riverbank now, staring into the current, her hand resting gently on her belly. The water never rushed near her. It curved, paused, shimmered, as if waiting for her command. The women who once feared her began to come quietly with offerings, fruit, beads, cloth soaked in oil. They laid them on the ground without words and returned to their homes, heads bowed. They did not know if Lami was human or divine, but she was no longer simply the girl who could not conceive. Even the children changed. At first they had stayed away, hiding behind their mothers. But now they played nearby. Some laughed and reached for her belly as she passed. Others sat cross-legged, staring at her with solemn curiosity, as if seeing something ancient they could not name. Only the men remained wary. Especially her husband. Tunji grew thinner. His eyes sunk deeper. He began whispering that Lami's child would curse the village. That the river had marked them all for death. He walked in circles at night, muttering to the wind. But no one listened anymore. Lami did not speak of revenge. She no longer needed to. The river moved in her favor. Her dreams grew clearer. Her child kicked only when she stood in water or touched the river stones, as if it too remembered where it had come from. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Lami stood alone in the shallows. A breeze passed, whispering in the leaves. And for the first time she whispered back. I remember. The river rippled. The moon rose. And the child within her stirred like a secret waking. When the time came, Lami gave birth beneath the silver light of the full moon, but it was unlike any birth the village had ever seen. There was no pain, no anguished cries, only a quiet calm that settled over the riverbank where she had chosen to bring her child into the world. The water around her shimmered as if celebrating the arrival of something both sacred and powerful. The child emerged with skin pale like river clay but marked by strange ancient symbols etched in deep blue along his arms and chest. Symbols no one in the village recognized, yet which seemed to pulse with quiet energy. The marks moved subtly as if alive, shifting like ripples in a stream. His eyes were the most unsettling of all, deep, swirling pools that reflected the world like moving water, calm and endless. The baby did not cry, not once. Instead, he gazed silently at those who came near, his presence unsettling and mesmerizing all at once. The villagers whispered in hushed tones, unsure whether to fear or revere the child. Word spread quickly, and the guilty among the villagers began to suffer strange ailments. It started with Tunji, Lami's husband, who fell into a wasting sickness. His skin turned gray and dry, his breath shallow. He muttered about shadows that clung to him and voices carried on the river's breath. As his health deteriorated, others connected to the cruel drowning followed suit, mysterious fevers, tremors, and nightmares that left them pale and hollow-eyed. Elders spoke of the child as a vessel of ancient justice, born not just to live but to balance wrongs too deep to ignore. The sacred river's power, once scorned, now flowed visibly in the boy, demanding reckoning. Lami watched as the village shifted around her. People crossed themselves when she passed. Mothers pulled their children closer. But none dared confront her. Instead, they left offerings by the river's edge, hoping to appease what they barely understood. Despite his eerie calm, the child was no stranger to her touch. Lami felt warmth whenever he rested against her chest. His breathing synced with the gentle lapping of water against stone, as if his life was entwined with the river's eternal flow. At night, she heard whispers again, this time clearer, more urgent. They spoke of a balance that must be restored, a debt that must be paid. The child was the promise and the warning, the end of cruelty, and the beginning of something new. One evening, Lami stood by the river watching the boy. His gaze was fixed on the water, unblinking. The river's surface rippled, and the symbols on his skin glowed faintly blue. He reached out, touching the water with delicate fingers. The river answered, swirling faster, carrying with it the voices of the past, the pain of the wronged, the fury of justice. The child of the river was not a curse but a reckoning, and the village would never be the same. As dawn broke over the village, a restless tension hung heavy in the air. Word had spread that Lami would return to the sacred river, the very place where life and death had twisted together into something neither the villagers nor their elders fully understood. The villagers gathered silently along the riverbanks, a mix of fear, awe, and anticipation shadowing their faces. Some whispered prayers, others stared wide-eyed, uncertain whether to expect mercy or doom. Lami stepped forward, her steps steady and calm despite the crowd's restless murmurs. Cradled in her arms was her child, the living emblem of the river's mysterious power. His skin still bore those shifting blue symbols, his eyes reflecting the swirling currents below, endless and unyielding. The river itself seemed to respond to her presence. Slowly, the water began to rise, creeping higher with a deliberate grace that made the onlookers hold their breath. The sacred river, once a quiet witness to life's flow, now pulsed with a fierce energy that sent ripples of unease through the village. Among the crowd, Lami's husband and his family lurked near the edge, pale and trembling. They had tried to hide, to deny their part in the terrible act that had nearly drowned Lami in the cold depths. But there was no escape. As the river swelled, its reach extended, drawing ever closer to those who had turned their backs on the gentle woman it had claimed and returned. Panic rose like the floodwaters. The husband tried to run, dragging his legs through mud and wet grass, but the river's current seemed alive, reaching for him with invisible hands, pulling at his feet, slowing him, binding him in place. His in-laws, no better prepared, stumbled in fear, their faces twisting with dread as the water crept toward them, relentless. Lami stood unmoving, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. Her heart was heavy, yet her spirit was calm. She understood the pain and fear in those running, but her soul carried a deeper truth. This was not merely vengeance, it was a reckoning long overdue. As the waters curled around the fleeing family, she raised her voice, clear and steady, cutting through the chaos. "I do not wish harm upon you," she said. "But the river remembers what you tried to bury in its depths. It carries the voices of the innocent, and it demands balance." The river's current surged, pushing back the terrified figures, but the water itself did not strike or punish. It was the force of truth, unyielding and impartial. Lami looked down at her child, whose glowing symbols pulsed softly in response. The boy's eyes met hers with an unspoken promise. Justice would be served, but there was room for forgiveness in this new world. In that moment, Lami made her choice. "I forgive you," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Not for your sake but for mine. For the future I must protect." The river's fury softened, its rising halted as if acknowledging her mercy. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the water receded, leaving the frightened family trembling but unharmed, marked not by the river's wrath, but by the weight of their guilt. From that day forward the village changed. The sacred river remained a powerful presence, respected and feared, but it also became a symbol of mercy and renewal, a reminder that even in the darkest waters, life could return with strength and grace. Lami's child grew beneath its watchful flow, carrying the legacy of both sorrow and hope, while she herself became a guardian, not just of the river but of the balance between justice and forgiveness. The river's final flow was not the end, but a beginning, one that would shape the village's destiny for generations to come. Years passed, and the story of Lami transformed from whispered fear to reverent legend. The girl who had once been drowned in the sacred river and returned pregnant was no longer just a woman but a symbol of the water's enduring power, known across the village and beyond as the River Mother. Lami had changed in ways the villagers could scarcely understand. Her eyes, still holding the calm depth of the river, seemed to see beyond the ordinary world. Her voice carried the soothing cadence of flowing water, gentle yet unshakable. People came to her with their troubles, their wounds, their prayers, knowing she held the ancient strength of the river within her. Her child, now a young boy with skin marked by shifting symbols like the rippling surface of water, was no ordinary child. He spoke in riddles, his words weaving between storms and sunshine, as if the very elements listened when he spoke. The villagers watched with awe as thunder obeyed his calls and gentle rains followed his footsteps. The boy was a bridge between the earthly and the mystical, born of water and sorrow but carrying the promise of renewal. The sacred river itself, once murky and silent, had regained a clarity and vigor that seemed to pulse with life. Fish thrived where they had once fled, and the waters sparkled under the sun with an almost magical sheen. The villagers tended to its banks with newfound respect and devotion, aware that their fortunes were tied intimately to the river's health. They sang songs of gratitude and protection, passing down the tale of Lami and her child as a reminder of nature's power and grace. Lami walked these watersides often, barefoot, letting the cool flow embrace her feet, feeling the pulse of the river beneath the earth. Sometimes at twilight, villagers would swear they saw her figure gliding across the water's surface, steps silent and sure, as though she walked where water itself flowed. It was said she never truly died, that she was chosen by the river spirits to be their guardian and messenger. Where once there had been pain and loss, there was now a living testament to resilience and sacred balance. The river, like Lami, had been reborn, carrying the stories of the past while flowing toward an endless future. Her presence brought peace to restless souls and strength to those in despair. Women who had lost hope in the fields found courage by her side. Children who feared the night's darkness learned to trust the river's song. Even the harshest skeptics could not deny the gentle miracles that seemed to follow the river mother. And so, the legacy of Lami and her child grew, a story of death and life, of sorrow transformed into power, and a bond that no cruelty could break. The river's flow was steady and sure, just like her footsteps, always moving forward, always carrying the promise of renewal.